Hey guys, Steven Zurita here, and welcome to part one of my Zeo Morphing tutorial series. Now, typically a video tutorial is to show you how to do one specific visual effect. This series is covering 5-ish different shots, so several different effects, so it's going to be split up in multiple parts because it's going to be a lengthy process. So we're going to start off with the first two shots that you might have seen in my Zeo Morphing video that I released a couple weeks back. The first shot is where Mike and I have energy surging through our bodies, and then the second shot is where we materialize the Zeonizers on our wrists. Let's get started in After Effects and learn how to do those effects.
So we're going to get started. We're going to create a new solid. This first part is so ridiculously easy. We're gonna make it blue. I tend to gravitate towards the 230 hue value. I've been doing it for, oh geez, over 10 years. I've been using that same blue value, but I like blue. What can I say? Okay, so we're gonna turn the visibility switch off. This energy we're gonna be creating starts from the hands, goes up to the chest, and then down, even though it seems like it would go the other way because it materializes on the hands. I looked at the show and that's what they did. Although to be fair, you have a little bit of leeway here because the show was very inconsistent with how this morph worked, which is actually kind of cool. All right, so we're gonna get started. We're gonna create a mask right there. And we're gonna create another mask right here. And I'm holding and dragging so I can get these beveled, or these curves here. Then we're gonna hit MM on the keyboard, or you can open up your menus there. I prefer MM just to keep things clear. And we're gonna keyframe on the mask path. We're also going to begin the layer right here. We can do that by dragging the beginning of the layer like so, or if you hit Alt open bracket on your keyboard, that's a good shortcut as well. So we're going to move these up Mike's arms. So let's go about 6 frames. And we're just going to double click one of the corners, drag up, and double click away. Same thing over here. Drag up, double click away, and let's expand these just a bit. You know what? Let's actually get these even closer up. Now, it's not going to be that simple because it's going to want to go in a straight line and not to curve around his arms. So we're going to add a couple more keyframes. We're going to go to roughly the halfway point and just guide these along. And let's change the shape just a bit. Now, the nice thing about this part of the effect is it happens so quickly, you don't have to be that precise because it'll be over before you know it. But when it looks very noticeable, then we can go in and correct things. So let's see. Whenever I'm keyframing, tend to go either between right halfway between keyframes when I'm adjusting them, or I'll go where the distance between where the object needs to be and where it is the greatest. That way I get a better return on my keyframing later, if that makes sense. All right, so they go up here, and then in the show, it goes down as a form of energy, just straight down the body. So we're going to make a third mask. We're also going to keyframe the opacity. For the first 2 masks, we're going to move forward 1 frame, and I'm hitting the page down button. If you don't have that on your keyboard, I believe if you hold Command, you can use the left and right arrows, or Control, depending on what operating system you're using. But yeah, mask opacity down, so that way they will disappear. And then let's open up mask 3, turn mask opacity on, and we're going to go forward 1 frame and make it 0. You know what, let's move both those keyframes ahead 1. Just so that way, as these first 2 masks disappear, this one appears. Now we're going to just move it down over the next 5-ish frames, which is exactly how many frames we had left over. What do you know? That's it. We just move it down. Let's see how that looks. Pretty straightforward. let's make that 4 frames just because that's such a simple movement. And we're going to Alt end bracket there to end the clip. Just that way we're not rendering extra footage, even though it won't show up. It'll be a little bit quicker on the render, although this is pretty simple. If you're having problems rendering that, you should look into a better computer. So that looks pretty boring, I gotta admit. It looks like something I made in MS Paint, which I mentioned last week I actually used to do effects in, but we want to make it look better than MS Paint. So let's actually go in and feather these out a ton. 64. Let's just make them all 64 pixels. And let's see what that looks like. Let's feather that main blob more. Let's just go 80. Nope. 100. Okay. Still looking pretty basic. There's a couple things we can do. Toggle switches. Turn on motion blur, and you can see that the masks will actually blur as if we're moving a layer itself. And we get a nice, really cool thing where this layer and these layers kind of blur on as the opacity is keyframed. Now, to really make this pop, you go to your transfer modes, which are just kind of ways of telling how the layer should interact with the colors of the layers underneath it. And just click add. And then we'll go up to effect, stylize, glow. So add adds the light values to the layers beneath it, and glow gives it a glow, so that makes it very energetic. And that looks much better. So that one's actually done. That was pretty quick. If I wasn't talking over it, it would have been even quicker. So we're going to move right on into the second clip, and that's when these Zeonizers right here materialize on. Now, the way we shot this, here, let me show you, is exactly like that. Mike does the hand twist. One of us, he holds his hand still. One of us straps the Zeonizer onto him, and then he does the hand twist again. And then we just cut it together right here in After Effects. And we try to find 2 frames that look close enough and doesn't look too jump cutty. Now, you're always going to see a jump cut no matter what, but we can hide that. All right, let's just go back to right there. Okay, so that kind of right there looks pretty cool. He twists his hand and then boom, it shows up. Let's see if we can smooth that out a bit. I'm gonna extend this layer beneath it, and this is the layer that does have the Zeonizer right there. And I like that this part right here where we see the very edge of the movement stop. So we're going to keyframe the top layer away. So we're going to hit T to toggle opacity, move forward 2 frames, and goes down to 0. So that way we have a nice 50% opacity right there. And it really helps blend the entire effect. And everything's moving so fast, you can't really tell that it's 2 layers blended on top of each other. And it helps hide the jump cut just a bit. But really the way to hide the jump cut is to do all the flashy animations, which is what we're going to do. So this is going to be a little bit more in depth than the first shot. First thing we're going to do is isolate the Zeonizer. So we're going to duplicate our second layer, and we're going to call it Zeonizer. We're going to put it up top. Let's solo it right now. Grab our mask tool. We're actually going to just trace around the Zeonizer. Let me zoom in a bit so I can see these details better. All right, so we're gonna close that out, hit MM to open up the mask, and let's blur that 3 frames. 3 always seems to be the magic number. Okay, so we have this Zeonizer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to keyframe, and it's actually going to disappear at the frame where the second layer becomes fully visible. So that way, as the motion goes on, we can't really tell that was a still frame. We're going to grab the anchor point, and I just hit Y on the keyboard to toggle the pan behind or anchor point tool. And then we're going to drag it right smack dab to the center of our layer. And then we're going to hit P and then Shift R, and Shift lets you hold up multiple properties in your timeline. So I could toggle opacity if I wanted to, instead of just saying 1 at a time. So P, Shift R, And we're going to set a keyframe. And we're going to easy ease these keyframes because it's an organic-like motion. And we're going to scroll forward to the beginning of his hand twist. Okay, now, I skipped a very important step, as you can see here. Go back to where we started with these first two keyframes. You want to freeze frame that layer. Now we move forward. And we place the Zeonizer roughly in the same spot it would be on his wrist. Adjust the rotation to match. Let's go to this halfway point. Again, adjust the rotation. And let's check how it looks in between. Just nudging it wherever we need it to be. Right there should be a little closer. Okay. So that's pretty good. You can be as detailed as you want. And then also, before we forget, let's turn on motion blur so that way it matches. And you can, if your motion blur looks wonky every once in a while, it'll look wonky. Like there's too much blur or not enough and it's not matching with the footage, go up to your composition settings and click the advanced tab. Usually what you shoot in is half of your shutter speed. Or I guess, here's the math. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed is usually 1/48. If you're shooting at 30 frames per second, your shutter speed is usually 1/60. So essentially you see what I mean. The fraction you shoot at is 1 over your shutter speed times 2. So not half, it's times 2. But to get that, you need a shutter angle of 180. So match your shutter angle to whatever your shutter speed was. You got to do some math there, but that's the most common one. And then shutter phase is 0, that's fine. And you can see that we've got some nice motion blur to help really blend that in there, like the rest of the video behind it. Okay, so we still just have this thing that pops up out of nowhere and we need to transition it on. The way they did that in the show is they would actually animate. I don't think they used After Effects back in 1996 when they were doing Power Rangers Zeo. Maybe they did, but the way they did it is essentially they animated masks to reveal. I just made a motion with my hand in real life, which you can't see because it's a tutorial, to reveal the Zeonizer. So we're going to start and make a mask right here on that part of the jewel, and then on this button right here. So let's hit MM, and now we have all of our masks. Let's feather each of these about 3. Mask path, let's keyframe those. And let's actually solo this layer so that way this is the only thing we're worrying about. Now, when we have all these add masks and they're all over the same original mask, you don't see any difference. So let's go in and change some settings here. So if we subtract inverted, and then add for mask 3, and I think if you start adding too many masks, you essentially have to start creating new layers, and it gets very complicated, but we lucked out because there's only 3 masks here. We have those elements. We have our first keyframes, and let's just go to the very end. And we're going to just double click these and expand them. And let's move that over. And then let's go to this top half, expand it, and move that down. So let's actually reorder these masks a bit. Let's set these both to add. Let's set this mask 1 to subtract inverted. And if we put it at the end, there we go. That solves everything. So that keeps everything within this blue mask while these pink and green masks reveal the entire clip. And side note, I have the reason every once in a while in this tutorial you might see it just like switch through random comps. I have the Apple Magic Mouse, Mighty Mouse, I forget which one, but it's the one that's entirely a trackpad surface. And it's very annoying because, you know, you'll just brush your finger against it and it thinks you want to go scrolling around through different comps, which is not the case. So there we go. Let's actually have these come on a couple frames sooner. Just that way everything happens so quick you don't really get a chance to process it, you know? And let's see what that looks like. That looks pretty cool. We have it appearing out of nowhere. That right there is actually pretty effective. There's still a couple more steps we need to add in, though, to really make this match the show. So we're going to duplicate our Zeonizer layer. Let's solo it again just so you can see what I'm doing. We're going to go up to Effects, Generate, Fill. And then we're going to select yellow. And I am partial to the yellow hue of 60. As I said, I've been using these for a while. Then we're going to go to blur. I love the Gaussian blur. Just blur it out some. And then go to switches modes, set it to add. Or if that's a little too harsh for you, you can go with screen. Either works. I really like add because it gives it a nice glow and it's energetic. And this is Power Rangers, man. All right. We're going to go to the frame right before that mask animation's done. We're going to move forward to the end right here and have our opacity keyframe down to 0. And basically that just makes it look like there's this really cool light. So already we've got a pretty cool effect right here. And we're mostly done. Now, the very next thing to do, I hit Apple A and then hit U twice, and that's a very quick shortcut way to kind of collapse your timeline down and see everything. You can also hit the tilde key, which is in the upper left corner right under the escape key of your keyboard to if you want to just see your entire timeline. And it'll basically do that with whatever window you have selected. If you want to, I mean, you could do that to the preview. I don't know why you would want to, but it's a really quick way to just kind of, if you need to give something some more screen real estate, really good shortcut to do that. So we have the Zeonizer showing up. Looks pretty slick. And you know what? That yellow is pretty harsh. I'm actually going to lower its opacity to 50. Just that way we can actually see the Zeonizer underneath it, because before it was getting really lost and we couldn't see the detail. There we go. Nice. Next thing we need to do is make a blue lightning triangle, which sounds like a really cool thing to do, because it is. All right. Let's make a new composition, and we're going to call it lightning triangle. And I can't spell today. Working on it. We're going to make it 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. We're going to create a black solid. Call it BG. There we go. And we're going to create a lightning layer. This is going to be so ridiculously easy. Basically, they would do this for each shape of the Zeo Rangers. In the video, I have a circle and then 2 circles, which is, I just take the circle and duplicate it and squish it down via the scale. The triangle is going to be easy. The square would be easy. I guess you could do the star the same way. Basically, you're just making shapes. So we have our lightning layer. We're going to go to Generate Advanced Lightning. And we're going to select, let's see, it's just regular strike. We don't want there to be too much going on. So let's bring up the grid. Just that way it's easier to see what's going on. And then let's bring up the title safe too, because I actually just want to see some geometry here. Basically, we're making a triangle with lightning. Let's center this up a little bit more. Okay, there we go. And then we're going to go to our glow settings. I never really liked the default glow. In the newer versions of After Effects, it's better. But we're going to just get rid of the default glow because we're making our own. Otherwise, you could actually do this whole effect without making a pre-comp. But since you came here to get a tutorial, I'm going to teach you some really good stuff. All right, let's up the core radius to 4 and the opacity to 100. And I always like to check these settings. Let's see the decay and the forking very low. We want this to be a pretty simple lightning. let's leave the turbulence as is. And the conductivity state affects the kind of coursing of the lightning. And you could keyframe it, but since I've really never had to, move it forward, stop it, then move it back, I just let it go with an expression, a time expression. So time times 6. Now, the best values I've found for this expression are between 6 and 12, depending on how crazy you want your lightning to be. If you go over 12, it starts moving around so fast you can't see what's going on. It's actually pretty comedic in a bad way. It looks like a bad effect. So 6 is a nice, decent amount. You can see the detail. And let's see, expert settings. We don't need to mess with any of these. Although, if you ever have the time, you can do some pretty cool stuff with this. Yeah. And then we're going to duplicate our lightning. And then we have 2 instances of it. And we're going to, on the second one, click composite on original. So that way, when I move this bottom piece, we can see the original. Now I think you can see what I'm starting to do here. And we're going to go to advanced lightning, duplicate it again. We already have composite on original check. So we're taking this second instance right here and we're going to complete the triangle right there. We're just dragging it over. And if you want to get really detailed, you can make sure that the direction to this or the origin to this matches the direction to this, and the origin to that matches the direction of this, and blah, 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 just to make sure it's going and lining up pixel per pixel per pixel. But I think that's pretty good, actually. So the next thing we're going to do is just kind of mess up this lightning a bit, because the stock lightning effects always look like stock lightning effects, even with all those modifications we were doing. It looks very computer generated, a little too clean. So what I like to do is I go to distort, turbulent displace. I move the size way down, way down. So we're just kind of barely moving it around. And now, let's see, right there, right around the 7 range, you can see that the width of these lightning bolts changes thanks to the turbulent displacement. It looks a little thicker here and a little thinner there. If I zoom in a little more, I highly recommend you full screen it right here just to tell. Looks thicker here, thinner there, a little more random. Things are randomly occurring in nature. And again, we can just keyframe the evolution. And 60 is a good amount. Time times 60. And you, if I didn't explain before, you can make an expression by alt-clicking on the stopwatch. And then you type in some code right here, and it makes a really quick way to auto-generate some animation right there. All right. And since we're here, let's see what happens and mess with the amount a little bit. Yeah, let's leave it around 70, 69. There we go. Next thing we're going to do is go to blur and sharpen, and we're going to click vector blur, CC vector blur. Now this is a really cool blur. Gives you some, it's not really a blur in the typical sense, but you start getting these weird patterns if you go a little overboard. And then if you go in the other direction, you get these weird patterns where it kind of fattens it out, but also thins it out. We're going to just barely, okay, like a 4 or a 5, change it up a bit. And now I think that's much better looking lightning than we had before. It doesn't look so canned, doesn't look so computer generated. All right, now what do? Now we make it glow. All right, so there's a couple ways you can do this. If you're familiar with a Ryan Weber tutorial, I was just talking about it with some friends at dinner last week, actually. He makes his glow via a series of geometrically increasing Gaussian blurs. So you can do that by duplicating this lightning 3 times, adding a Gaussian blur to each layer and making it more and more blurred as the layers go up. Or you can use this method, which I'm going to do just because it'll be easier so I don't have to look at all these effects. Use an adjustment layer, set it to screen, and go to blur, sharpen, Gaussian blur, and we're going to blur it out some. And I'm going to zoom in to 100%. Let me go at a full resolution here so I can see all the details, and you can see there's a little bit of forking we were missing earlier. But I'm really liking this lightning, and again, it looks thicker here than it does over here. Looks really good. We're going to blur it. And the interesting thing about using adjustment layer with screen is it still leaves the original untouched layer underneath. It's imagining the final, basically, if we put it to normal, this is what it would look like. It's blurring everything. But since it's set to screen, it takes this adjusted image and composites it on top of the original underneath, which is why we see the original lightning right there. And let's blur this an even 15 just to keep the numbers clean. And we're going to duplicate that. And again, this screen layer is doing the exact same thing to the layers beneath it, including the adjustment layer that we just created. And we're going to double this 15 into 30. And we're going to do it again. So you could make this next layer 45, or you could double the 30 to 60. It's up to you. For lightning, I typically double the layer each time instead of doubling or tripling just the original instance. So we're going to make that one 60. All right. That looks pretty good. And sometimes you'll run into problems when you're doing lightning glows or glows inside of pre-comps where the glow runs off the screen or this black background shifts and you lose the glow because it needs it needs to be there for this effect to work. What you can do to fix that is increase the scale or increase the size in your layer settings. And one thing I usually like to do, I know I didn't need to do it here because I knew I wasn't going near the edges, is I like to make the pre-comp bigger than the comp that it originally was in. So if we start losing glows around the edges, that's okay. That's going to be cut out of the frame anyways. Okay, let's go back into our comp. Let's pull our lightning triangle. I'm going to move this down to tutorial comps. These are the actual comps from the episode. I'm going to collapse that. Lightning triangle. I'm actually going to put it in a pre-comp folder because you want to have a very nice and organized project. We're going to move lightning triangle, put it right there, and we're going to colorize it. You can do this a couple different ways. The easiest way is to go to color balance and move your midtones up to 100 and your highlights up to 75. And we're making Zeo Ranger 3 blue, so we're doing that for the blue values. And then click Preserve Luminosity. There we go. If you have Video Copilot, you can mess around with the Color Vibrance plugin, which is pretty cool. I actually didn't, even though you get some really interesting results. This is such a simple effect that I'm just going to stick with the basic color balance because A, it's what I used, and B, everybody has it. Now we want this lightning to appear and the black to disappear. So we're going to select screen and we're going to rotate our lightning. And we're going to move it right there. And we're actually going to parent it to this Zeonizer. And let's change the layer colors here. Let's make these all blue just so we can differentiate them a little bit. We're going to scale it down. Keyframe that. We're going to hit P, keyframe our position. We're going to hit U so we can see both those values. And you can see by keyframing it, it follows the motion of the Zeonizer, so we have a lot less keyframing to do because we just need it to go down his hand there. We're going to scale it up. Then we're going to end right there. Actually, let's move it forward a frame. Duplicate. And then move the next instance forward, and you're going to see it's going to do the exact same thing. We do need to adjust the ending position a little bit. And the beginning position's fine as is. Now, I don't like the way this lightning just kind of disappears. So what we're going to do is we're going to fade it away. And we could fade it away in here. We could also fade it away in the main comp with opacity, but that's kind of boring, and this white, it just looks weird if someone was to pause it on this frame. So we're going to do a really cool dynamic fade, and it's a good reason that I use the 3-layer adjustment layers method because it makes this process a lot easier. If I didn't use the 3 adjustment layers method, basically I would have a bunch of instances of this lightning. I would duplicate it, and then these Gaussian blurs would be on the lightning layers instead of adjustment layers if you want to go that way. But if you really want to follow this tutorial to a T, you're going to go to new solid. We're going to call this noise matte. We're going to make a fractal noise matte. And let's just solo these 2 layers so we don't have to worry about all those adjustment layers on top. We're going to go to noise, fractal noise. And we don't have to mess too much here, but fractal noise is a really cool plugin. Highly recommend you become best friends with this plugin. We're going to up the contrast. We're going to up the brightness. Let's keyframe the evolution times 60. Sure, why not? Actually, let's go 360. So it's going to make a full revolution every second. This effect happens really quick. So we're only going to see about 2 frames of it. So let's make those 2 frames count. And let's see. We're already on the frame we need. Let's move back 1 frame. Now, we're going to take our noise matte, keyframe the brightness, go forward 3 frames, and we're going to bring it all the way down to 0. Then we're going to go to fast blur, blur it out a bit, and we'll repeat edge pixels, why not? And I'm going to easy ease the last keyframe just so we get a better halfway point there, which looks nice. Now, why am I doing all this? Well, I'm going to create a Luma matte. So I can go to lightning, select Luma matte, and basically, as the bright areas of this layer disappear, so do the lightning bolts. So we have a more interesting looking fade. And if I'm to, let me really extend the keyframes here so you can see what's going on. So you see this is moving from bright to dark much slower. You can see more detail. And you can see something similar happening with the lightning. It just kind of slowly disappears in bits. That's what we're doing. All right. There we go. Now you could take the fractal noise, put it in the lightning layer and set its blending mode to normal, but then you wouldn't be able to get the fast blur in there to kind of smooth out the edges there. So that's why we're doing this as a Luma matte, if you wanted to wonder why. So now we have the lightning disappearing much better, much more organically. And let's move this forward a frame. There we go. And let's unsolo it so we get our fancy glow back. Let's turn our noise matte off. There we go. That looks pretty cool. And you know what? Let's actually add a frame or 2 in between the appearances. Nice. Let's add 2 frames. Just to really make it look cool. Yeah. There we go. Now, we don't want to motion blur those layers because lightning, you never really see lightning motion blur in real life. You always see it, boom, in the instance. So don't worry about motion blurring that. Now, the last thing we need to do for this layer is add a bit of a blue glow coming out of this right there. So we're going to go to New, Layer, Solid. Select blue. Good old 240. You've never failed me. And you can move the layer, or you can just draw the mask. I like to move the layer, so if I end up using these elements in other places, I usually don't run into instances where the masks I'm creating run into the edges of the layer. So I'll center it up. We're going to parent this to the Zeonizer, turn it off, and just create a nice ellipse right there. Turn it on, boom. What is this going to be? Well, this is going to be a cool light ray. So we're going to go to generate, and we're going to mess with a couple there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can use light rays, you can use light burst. I'm actually, you know, it's odd. They sound so similar, but they do different things. Light burst, you can set the ray length. Boom. This looks really cool, especially on layers that have more colors than just blue. You can use generate light rays. This will kind of do something similar. Again, you have to just mess with all of them every time you use this instance because it's going to be different every time. But this is so simple. We're going to use a much simpler version of both those two plugins. Go up to Blur. Let's pick Radial Blur, and we're going to set it to a zoom, and we're going to set the center to just up here on Mike's wrist. We're going to take the amount right there, and we're going to start the layer, Alt, begin bracket, the same frame that everything else starts. And let's bring this down to 50. No, 100. We want it to be kind of visible. 150. There we go. Amount. And we're going to hit U so we can see that keyframe. Let's increase it. And, you know, let's actually move the origin of the blur. And it's going to go back down to 100 right there. And we're going to add a Shift T to access opacity just to really help fade this on because it's going to look really odd if it just appears all at once. We're going to fade it on for 2 frames. So 0, 1, 2. Then same thing right there. Let's click that diamond, put a keyframe, and move it back. And we'll actually move that forward a frame so it fades out slower than it appears. We're going to set this to add. And we have a nice cool blue splotch that appears, and it's kind of getting lost there. So let's see if we can brighten it up. First, I'm going to go to curves. Let's see if I can boost the alpha. There we go. That's working. And that is how you make the Zeonizer appear. So let's see what that looks like. So there's so much stuff happening right here, it's going to naturally draw your eye away from where you can see the jump cut, which is right here on his shirt. But even that, if you look at the shirt, we hit it with that very, very, very quick crossfade. So it's hard to tell. This is pretty legit. I'm pretty proud of how this turned out. And you know what? It just auto-saved. I'm going to save your project. Number 1 tip, save is your best friend. Apple S or Control S, that is your best friend.
All right, that does it for part 1. If you guys have any questions about anything in the video or suggestions for stuff you'd like me to cover in future videos, please leave them in the comments below. If you like this tutorial, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe because we have the remaining parts of the Zeo Morphing series tutorial coming up soon. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to animate the particle trail that follows our hands as we go through the morphing motions, and how to animate the lens flare effect that we see when the Zeonizer opens up in the insert shot. Thanks for watching, guys. Again, please subscribe for more nerdy vids and laughs, and I guess tutorials every Thursday. Punch it!